In the 4th year after my death, my grandmother found my old phone and dialed Harry's number. Harry? Helen? It's been 4 whole years, and now you decide to call me? What's the matter? The sugar daddy ran out of money? If you're broke, go sell yourself. Stop pretending to be pitiful with me. Let me tell you, I don't want to see you for even a moment, not even in death. On the other end of the phone, my grandmother was stunned, her hunched figure appearing particularly lonely. She held the phone delicately and asked, Harry, did you have a fight with Helen? I can't find Helen. After my grandmother spoke, her cloudy eyes looked around the empty room, and she murmured, as if remembering something, right, Helen is dead, gone. How could I forget again? Chapter 1, perhaps because I couldn't bear to leave my grandmother alone, I stayed by her side even after my death. Unfortunately, my grandmother developed Alzheimer's disease and often forgets that I'm already gone. This time, she had another episode and wandered off to the park, forgetting the way back home. The stubborn old lady sat on a bench, muttering to herself, it's all right if I can't find my way. Helen will realize I'm not home and come find me. My spirit remained by my grandmother's side. Even though she wasn't far from home, I couldn't guide her in the right direction because she couldn't hear me speak. As the sun began to set, I, as a spirit, grew increasingly anxious. An elderly lady nearing 80, if she didn't return home in time and spent the night alone in the park, she wouldn't be able to cope. Fortunately, it seemed that my grandmother also realized this. She looked around at the dwindling number of people and finally stood up. Approaching someone, she grabbed their arm and asked, have you seen my granddaughter, Helen? I knew that once my grandmother started talking to someone, they would soon understand her situation and most likely take her to the police station. Once she reached the police station, my grandmother would be safely returned home. Unfortunately, my grandmother asked the wrong person, because the person she grabbed was none other than Harry. Harry looked at my grandmother, his tone tinged with impatience. Where did Helen go? Why are you here all alone? It's so late, and she lets an old lady like you stay in the park alone? It's probably another. Chapter 2, he didn't say those last few words, perhaps out of consideration for my grandmother, but I knew what he meant. He wanted to say that I must be fooling around with some other random guy. See, even after 4 years of my death, this man's disgust for me hasn't diminished one bit. My grandmother didn't understand his meaning and was actually happy to see Harry. Harry! It's been so long since you've come to my house for a meal. Aren't you the one who loves eating my dumplings the most? Tomorrow is your birthday. Come to my house and have dumplings. You young people should treat each other well. Helen, that girl, is good at everything, but she likes to keep things to herself. When Helen went out today, she even mentioned buying you a birthday gift. She wants to surprise you tomorrow. It turns out my grandmother's memory was stuck on that day. Back then, we were still deeply in love, just like any other passionate couple in the world, and his little mistress hadn't appeared yet. What a pity! Upon hearing this, Harry's lips curled into a mocking smile. Grandma, that's not funny. Helen and I have already broken up. You say she went out to buy me a birthday gift, but I'm afraid she bought a birthday gift for some other man. My grandmother was taken aback. You broke up? But Helen never told me. Harry, don't be angry. When Helen comes back, I'll give her a good scolding. The sight of the little old lady getting angry was incredibly adorable. I wanted to hug her and tell her not to be angry, but my spirit passed right through my grandmother's body. After 4 years, I still haven't gotten used to being just a spirit. Chapter 3, Harry laughed even harder. Clearly, he didn't believe my grandmother's words. I've told you, we really broke up. If all of this is just a trick taught to you by Helen, I'll forgive it this once. Please don't mention her name in front of me anymore. Just then, 2 middle-aged women from the same neighborhood walked over and saw my grandmother's surprised expression. Auntie, it's so late, why haven't you gone back home? Did you forget where you live again? After speaking, one of the women sighed and shook her head. It's really pitiful, this old lady relying on her granddaughter. Little did we know, her granddaughter passed away 4 years ago, leaving behind only this old lady. Yes, I passed away 4 years ago. I remember that birthday 4 years ago when I happily went out to buy him a gift, only to see him in the mall with another woman being all affectionate. In a daze, I walked out, and then I received a private message from a stranger on a social media app. When I opened it, there was a selfie of a girl wearing a man's white shirt, lying on a disheveled white bed sheet in a hotel. Along with the photo, there was a sentence, "They say little mistresses can't compete with heaven-sent ones." Do you think I, as a little mistress, can compete? I recognized the white shirt. The top button was sewn on by me personally. I remember it so clearly because the little flower I sewed on it was something I learned from a blogger online. Harry didn't mind it and even wore it to important meetings. He said it was a symbol of our love. But now, that symbol appeared on another woman. That's when I realized that love could be so cheap. Chapter 4. Upon hearing the words of the middle-aged women, Harry's whole body stiffened. Various emotions flickered across his face. Finally, he asked incredulously, "What are you saying? Helen is dead? You're all lying to me, right? It must be Helen who instructed you to say this. This woman is so good at sweet talking." The two middle-aged women were quite shocked, murmuring to themselves while supporting my grandmother. Who is this person? Could they be crazy? That's right, who dares to casually talk about someone's death? That's like cursing them. At that moment, my grandmother seemed to remember something. She opened her mouth, trembling lips, and finally said, "Yes, Helen. Helen is no longer here." Harry stood there dumbfounded, looking somewhat ridiculous. Meanwhile, my wandering spirit drifted back home with the two women supporting my grandmother. I even felt relieved when my grandmother entered the house, grateful that Harry didn't follow along. Perhaps because she remembered my death, my grandmother felt very sad. The lonely old lady sat on the sofa, her thin hands caressing my photo as tears silently streamed down her face. You were so young. How could you leave before your grandmother?" she whispered. I floated over, wanting to wipe away her tears, but I passed right through. All I could do was cry and console her, saying, "Grandma, Helen hasn't left. Helen is right here." Unfortunately, my grandmother couldn't hear me. At that moment, the doorbell rang, followed by Harry's voice. "Grandma, open the door. It's me, Harry." I was startled. No, I couldn't let him in. If he came in and started going through my things. Chapter 5. I dared not imagine what the consequences would be. My grandmother was a bit slow, slowly turning her head upon hearing the doorbell and the calling. She seemed to be contemplating. Harry's voice came from outside the door again. "Grandma, just let me in." "Helen, I thought about it calmly just now. How could you possibly be dead? It's just a ploy to deceive me. I'm here now. What are you pretending for? Open the door!" He shouted angrily, followed by forcefully ringing the doorbell. I was angry. His loud yelling would frighten my grandmother. He used to be different, always speaking softly, afraid of sounding even slightly harsh, whether it was towards me or my grandmother. But now, besides ringing the doorbell, he had started banging on the door. I felt a sense of resentment and rushed to the door, wanting to give him a good beating. As a spirit, I passed right through the door. Even though I swung my fist angrily, it just passed through lightly. Because I couldn't teach Harry a lesson, I was frustrated and even tears of anger welled up. But as a mere spirit, I couldn't cry with the same intensity as before. I scolded him in anger. "Yes, I lied to you. Leave. Just go away and never come back." Just as I was throwing a tantrum, I heard a sound of something falling inside the house. I was afraid something happened to my grandmother, so I quickly went back inside. Luckily, my grandmother was sitting safely on the chair, but the photo frame in her hand had fallen to the ground. She looked as if she had just woken up, staring at the fallen photo frame. Bending down to pick it up, then she held it in her hand, repeatedly wiping my photo with it. It's dirty. Helen loved this photo the most. Thankfully, it didn't break. Yes, this used to be my favorite photo because Harry took this photo for me. In reality, I wanted to tell my grandmother that this photo is no longer my favorite. My favorite one is with you in your hands, the photo of you and me together. Chapter 6. At that moment, after my grandmother finished speaking, she trembled as she stood up and placed the photo frame back in its original position. She stood there quietly, a smile appearing on her face once again. I sniffled, unsure whether this illness that the little old lady had was good or bad. Look, her condition has been deteriorating recently, and she has forgotten that her Helen has already passed away. At this inconvenient time, the front door was knocked once again. My grandmother responded, "Coming, coming." After saying that, she slowly made her way to the door. As the door opened, Harry's face, filled with anger, was still clearly visible. "Where's Helen?" After saying this, Harry's eyes scanned the surroundings. I knew he was looking for me. My grandmother was very tidy and often cleaned the house. Since she developed Alzheimer's disease, sometimes when I crouched nearby, I would even see her cleaning the house twice. The only difference was that 4 years had passed, and the house remained exactly the same. "Oh, it's Harry, isn't it?" After my grandmother lost her memory, she became even more adorable. She warmly called out to Harry, "Come in and have a seat." Helen. Helen went out. Yes, she went out, but where did she go? As she spoke, she turned her head to look outside the window and murmured, "It's already dark outside. Helen will surely come back soon. This girl never spends the night outside. She said she can only rest easy if she stays with me at night." Chapter 7. Harry didn't seem to be in the mood to listen to my grandmother's words, especially after hearing my grandmother say that I had gone out. His eyes were filled with mockery. Deep down he was mocking me. Fortunately, he was still somewhat decent and didn't say anything too harsh. Instead, he walked towards my room. I couldn't stop him from entering, so I simply floated beside him, observing what he would do next. In the instant the doorknob turned, a pink-themed room came into view. This was carefully prepared by my grandmother for me. She was skilled with her hands, even sewing the pink curtains inside. I really liked it here. Even after death, I would float around and rest on this bed. Unfortunately, souls don't need to sleep, nor do they feel tired. After opening the door, Harry continued walking inside, his gaze falling on the table, on our photo together. A hint of surprise flickered in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by mockery. "Aren't you already with someone else? Why keep this photo to reminisce about how miserably you deceived me in the past? Helen, the biggest regret of my life is loving you." After saying that, he violently opened the photo album, took out the pictures inside, and tore them to shreds. He even felt unsatisfied and angrily threw them on the table. I pouted. "Clearly, it was you who betrayed me first. Why are you feeling so aggrieved and angry now?" My grandmother stood at the door, holding a glass of juice, and asked in a daze, "Harry, what are you doing?" Because she was angry, the little old lady's steps became agile, and she angrily placed the juice on the counter. Seeing that Harry tore apart the photo of him and me, she immediately confronted him. "Harry, you're her boyfriend. How could you do such a thing?" Chapter 8. Grandmother also knew that Harry wouldn't have acted this way before. Back then, he was very gentle. The acquaintance between Harry and me was purely accidental. He was the heir of the Smith Group, while I was just a newcomer who had just entered the workforce. The Smith Group was almost every fresh graduate's dream in City A high salary, good benefits, and a place where you could boast about getting a job at class reunions. And I happened to be one of the lucky ones who got an internship through campus recruitment. Unfortunately, the workplace was much more complicated than I had imagined. I remember in my first month of work, the company organized a department gathering. Charlie, the department manager, was my senior schoolmate, and we had crossed paths a few times before. During the gathering, he insisted on pulling me and another girl who joined the company at the same time to have a drink, claiming that this department gathering was prepared for the two of us. He even patted my shoulder and leaned in to say, "Helen," I couldn't refuse. So I had to gulp down 2 glasses, but the girl sitting next to me had already turned pale. She held her glass of water, looking a bit lost. Sensing that something was off, I whispered to her, and she pitifully told me in a low voice that she was allergic to alcohol. The department manager, holding his glass, proudly declared that newcomers must have a drink. The girl looked troubled, and being timid, she could only explain softly, "I'm sorry, I'm allergic to alcohol and can't drink." As soon as he heard this, the department manager burst into laughter, saying, "I'm also allergic to alcohol, but it's okay to drink a little. People who have entered society need to learn how to drink a bit, you know." The others joined in the commotion, and the atmosphere became chaotic. I don't know where I found the courage, but I stood up to shield her from the alcohol. "Charlie, she really can't drink. If it's absolutely necessary, I can drink this glass for her. What do you all think?" Chapter 9. And so, amidst the commotion caused by those people, I ended up drinking 6 glasses in a row. Until in the end, I felt dizzy. As I leaned back on the couch to rest, I noticed Harry sitting next to me. He sat there quietly, his handsome features and cold expression captivating. Perhaps due to the alcohol, I mustered the courage to stare straight at him while he held his glass, looking equally interested in me. Our eyes met, and I knew that it was the feeling of attraction. Even when I was drifting in and out of consciousness, I couldn't help but wonder how there could be such a good-looking man. The next thing I knew, I found myself being pressed against the wall in the restroom. Being drunk, my body felt light and floaty. In a daze, I saw Charlie pressing against me, reaching for my pants. Fear startled me and brought some clarity to my senses. As I started to resist, "Senior, what are you doing?" Charlie was no longer the smiling and friendly person he appeared to be earlier. Instead, he wore a lecherous expression. "What am I doing?" "Of course, I want to be intimate with you. Helen, Senior likes you. Just look at how beautiful you are. How could Senior not be attracted to you? I promise that if you go along with me, I'll assign the next project to you, and once it's done, I'll promote you to be a team leader directly." After Charlie finished speaking, he started to bring his mouth closer to my face. I felt weak all over, but I continued to resist with all my strength. I didn't want my life to be destroyed by such a scumbag. "Let go of me, Charlie. What you're doing is illegal. Help. Someone help." My voice wasn't very loud, but the noise outside was quite loud. Just when I was about to resort to desperate measures, the noise from outside suddenly disappeared. Then the restroom door was kicked open. I saw a tall and upright figure appear, followed by a powerful punch landing on Charlie's face. That person embraced me, and we escaped from that hellish place. And that person was Harry. Oh, how charming he was back then. Chapter 10. At this moment, Harry had a stern face as he coldly watched Grandma trembling as she cleared the remnants of photos from the table. "Grandma, I'm not her boyfriend anymore. We broke up a long time ago. She betrayed me." Grandma froze for a moment before responding, "Helen wouldn't betray you. Out of 10 things she says, 9 of them are about you. She remembers your favorite dishes, and even though she can't cook, she insists on cooking for you." Grandma's voice was interrupted by the vibration of Harry's phone. I accidentally glanced at it and saw 2 words displayed on his phone screen, "Maggie." His eyebrows subtly furrowed, and despite the continuous vibrations, he didn't answer the call right away. I found it somewhat amusing. Men truly are creatures who quickly tire of things. Once they have something for a long time, they get bored. Wasn't he so in love with his little mistress back then? Now, in this state, who is he putting on a show for? After the phone vibrated for a while and stopped, it stubbornly continued to vibrate. Harry opened his mouth as if to say something, but in the end, he clenched his phone and walked out. I was curious whether they got married or not and what they would talk about. I think I must be really bored to want to know these things. So I followed Harry as he floated out of the room and out of the door. Hey. His voice was as pleasant as ever. Back then, I would often close my eyes and lean against his chest, listening to his magnetic voice echoing in my ears. Turns out he could also be so gentle with someone else. A voice came from the other end of the phone. Harry, why haven't you arrived yet? Without any hesitation, Harry replied in a gentle tone, I know, I'm coming right away. Indeed, he loved her just like before. Whenever Maggie called, he would come running. Chapter 11. After hanging up the phone, I saw the man in front of me hesitate at the door. Grandma sat on a chair, still unable to understand why Harry, whom I liked so much, broke up with me. She had a somewhat melancholic expression. Harry just glanced briefly before closing the door. Then he walked towards the direction of the elevator. As he reached the elevator, I originally wanted to go back and accompany Grandma, but I caught a glimpse of him taking something out of his pocket. Wasn't that my phone held in his hand? That despicable thief! When did he steal my phone? Angry, I pounced towards him, still passing through his body. The elevator door opened, and he stepped inside. I angrily sat on his shoulder and cursed loudly, Harry, I can't believe you have such a habit. This is theft, don't you understand that? You should go to the police station to eat. I advise you to return the item right now, or I'll curse you to death. Do you understand that you're a thief? Despite my roaring, he couldn't hear me at all. Instead, he put the phone in his pocket and casually left the residential area, getting into the parked Maybach at the entrance. The contents of the phone were what I was most worried about. Although I didn't want to see them being affectionate, I still had to follow and get into the car. But the destination was not his house. It was a hotel. Looking at the familiar place, something in my body seemed to awaken and caused a sharp pain. Why here? Why did they choose the hotel where we used to stay as their dating spot? And it was the same place where he was supposed to propose to me. Watching him get out of the car, I loudly questioned, Harry, aren't you disgusted? Can't you choose a different place? Only when I floated in did I realize that it wasn't a date they were having, but an engagement. Maggie was wearing a light blue fishtail dress, looking like a princess from a fairy tale. See, fairy tales are all lies. The princess and the prince are the real pair. Chapter 12. Maggie happily greeted him, Harry, where did you go? I couldn't find you anywhere. The Maggie in front of me had a bright smile, and even her tone of voice was gentle and soft, completely different from when she used to talk to me. As she spoke, she reached out her hand, ready to hold onto Harry's arm. I thought that after so many years, and now that I'm no longer human, I should be more accepting. But when I saw Maggie's intimate gesture, I couldn't help but feel disgusted. I don't know if Harry did it intentionally, but in the moment when Maggie reached out her hand, he took a step back, avoiding her touch, and instead walked towards his mother. Dad, Mom. Maggie's hand missed its target, and a hint of fierceness flashed in her eyes, but quickly she withdrew it, looking embarrassed. Suddenly, she looked in my direction and muttered through gritted teeth, Helen, it's all because of you. You damned woman, are you still lingering around after all these years? I was taken aback. Could Maggie see me? I reached out my hand and waved it in front of her eyes. Luckily, she couldn't see me. However, Maggie took a deep breath to adjust her emotions, then filled her face with a smile again, turned around, and walked towards Harry's parents. Harry. But Harry turned around and softly said, the guests haven't all arrived. I'll go to the restroom for a moment. You stay here and keep my parents company. With just one mention of Mom and Dad, Maggie's eyes curved with a smile. She lightly responded, okay. I didn't have time to pay attention to Maggie's small talk with Harry's parents because I saw Harry gripping his phone and quickly heading towards the restroom. He wasn't going to the restroom, he had other intentions. Sure enough, Harry reached the corner of the hallway, took out his phone, and pressed the power button. My heart started pounding. Knowing that I couldn't snatch the phone away, I clenched my fists and stared intently at his actions. Chapter 13. Soon, the phone screen lit up. Just as I was on edge, the screen flickered and went blank again. He tried again, but the phone still wouldn't turn on. Well, it had been over a year since Grandma last charged it. It flickered a moment ago, so maybe it's broken. However, Harry took out his own phone and dialed a number. "Lee, come out for a moment." Lee was his assistant, and he quickly came out after receiving the call. Harry handed him my phone. "Get it fixed as soon as possible. Also, look up any news about Helen." Lee took the phone, a hint of confusion in his eyes, but he agreed nonetheless. For years, a whole 4 years, and now he finally wanted to look up information about me. Unfortunately, I'm already dead. I even started to imagine that upon learning of my death, he would be happy. Right? After all, that woman he despised and didn't want to see even for a moment had finally disappeared from this world. Soon, Harry was called back by his mother. The hotel was filled with guests, all witnesses to their happiness. I used to have dreams of this scene, but unfortunately, I never lived to see this day. Harry was called up to the stage by the host to give a speech, and I floated in front of him, flying around. His brow remained furrowed, and I couldn't accept it. I approached his ear and asked him, "Harry, you unfaithful person, now that you've gotten what you wanted, what else could you possibly be unsatisfied with?" Harry couldn't hear me, but his gaze remained fixed on the direction of the door. I followed his gaze, but I didn't understand what he was waiting for. Was he waiting for Lee to come back and tell him that I was dead? Even if he found out, so what? Suddenly, the MC handed the microphone to Harry's mouth and smiled, asking him, "Harry, do you wish that today is the day you marry Maggie?" Chapter 14. The whole place fell silent, everyone's gaze fixed on Harry, and I also turned my gaze towards him. His lips moved, looking at Maggie beside him, about to speak when the phone vibrated again. "Sorry, I have to take this call." The call connected, and I floated closer to him, hearing Lee's voice coming from the phone. "Harry, Helen might have died 4 years ago. There was a drowning incident 4 years ago, and there is evidence suggesting that the car owner was likely Helen. However, the police couldn't find anything after searching for half a month, and since Helen's only relative is her elderly grandmother, they gave up." Lee's voice was low, only audible to Harry and me. I saw Harry's face turn pale instantly, and then his hand trembled as he pressed the end call button. Opening the message Lee sent him, inside was the news of my drowning 4 years ago. Although the report didn't explicitly mention the identity of the person who drowned, with just a little attention to my disappearance date, one could guess it was me. I moved closer to him, trying to blow his hair up, and said in a playful tone, "See, they say I'm dead, and you still don't believe it." "Oh, Harry, why are you still the same as back then? No matter what I say, you never believe." As soon as the words left my mouth, Harry spewed out a mouthful of blood. The bright red blood splattered on the red carpet, disappearing in an instant. Panic spread through the crowd, and even Maggie was stunned. Harry, who had just finished coughing up blood, fell straight to the ground. "Harry!" I shouted, rushing over to try and support him, but his body passed through me, and he fell to the ground lifelessly. The scene erupted in chaos. Harry's parents were also shocked, and a few people reacted quickly, hastily lifting Harry onto a car and rushing him to the hospital. I didn't know what to do next, so I floated into the car and crouched on Harry's chest, staring at him. "Harry, didn't you say that even if I died, you wouldn't spare me a second glance?" Chapter 15. When Harry woke up again, I was floating around the room. The VIP ward was different from a regular ward, it had a lot of space, and I could do a few somersaults without any problem. Upon seeing Harry wake up, his parents quickly rushed in, followed by Maggie. His mother asked with concern, "Harry, what happened to you? Have you been working too hard lately?" Harry smiled and replied, "Mom, I'm fine. Can you all leave? I want to rest quietly for a while." Maggie opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but ended up leaving with Harry's parents. The room instantly became quiet again. Suddenly, Harry lifted the covers and struggled to walk into the bathroom. I initially wanted to follow him, but then I felt it might be inconvenient. However, strange sounds came from the bathroom. Curiosity drove me to enter. I saw Harry crying with red eyes. Although he was trying to hold back, tears still poured out uncontrollably. Eventually, he started dry heaving. I have experienced that feeling before. When someone is overwhelmed with sadness, they vomit. Harry, did you know I died? Aren't you even a bit happy? After he finished vomiting, Harry freshened up and dragged his tired body back to the hospital bed. For some reason, Harry fell asleep, and I, lying beside him, also fell asleep. I was awakened by Maggie's voice. She was still speaking innocently, showing concern. Harry responded with a few words, and soon Lee also entered the room. Upon seeing Lee, Harry asked, "Take me to the place where she had the accident. Also, arrange it. I want to know what really happened in that car accident." Maggie's eyes flickered with a hint of panic upon hearing his words, although it was only for a moment, I still caught it. Regarding my death by drowning, I actually don't remember it very clearly. Perhaps because I'm just a soul, I have only recently started remembering bits and pieces of my time with Harry. Chapter 16, Harry and Lee left, and I saw Maggie quickly make a phone call, looking quite strange, so I followed along as I floated out. "Did you handle the matter as I asked you to? I know it's been 4 years, but you also know that once Harry decides to investigate, it's impossible to hide the truth. Are you sure you didn't reveal any loopholes? But now what's going on? For all these years, I've been trying my best to prevent him from finding out that the damn woman is already dead, but in the end, he found out. I suddenly realized that the damn woman Maggie was referring to was me. I was furious, ready to lash out at her. You were the damn woman. Wait, does this mean that my death wasn't an accident, but rather a carefully planned scheme by Maggie? How dare she commit murder? I angrily lunged towards Maggie again and again, but I was only passing through her back and forth. In the end, I grew tired and decided to follow Harry, wanting to see the place where I died. After all, I heard that my body still hasn't been recovered. How pitiful. As I floated into Harry's car, I happened to see Lee handing him the repaired phone. Talk about bad timing. I experienced it firsthand today. With a heart as cold as ashes, I watched Harry open my phone and entered the unlock password. Unfortunately, he guessed it right again. The password was his birthday. If only I hadn't died so suddenly and had the chance to change it, I would never have let him succeed. Soon, he came across the private messages on my social media, seeing Maggie's provocations towards me and the photos she sent me. I floated right in front of him and scolded, "You despicable man, can you see it now? It was you who betrayed me, not the other way around. You slept with someone else, how disgusting." After reading the messages, Harry's hands trembled uncontrollably. Finally, he closed his eyes in anguish and asked, "Helen, why didn't you tell me back then? It's all my fault. It's all my fault. Yes, it's all his fault." Chapter 17, Actually, I also asked him back then. On the day after Maggie sent me the photos, I went to his office and interrogated him, saying, "Harry, did you?" "Maggie?" But Harry suddenly changed and sneered at me, saying, "So what if I did?" "Helen, who do you think you are? Why should I report everything to you? Don't think I don't know what you've been doing behind my back. Listen carefully, Helen, Harry, have never loved you. He had told me he loved me just yesterday, and now he's denying everything while embracing another woman." I stared blankly at all of this, unable to believe my own ears. Until later, Maggie looked down on me with a mocking smile and said, "Helen, let me tell you the truth, you were just a substitute for Harry's emotions. Now that his real girlfriend is back, you, the substitute, better roll as far away as you can." I clearly remembered that a few days ago, he held me in his arms and proudly said, "Helen, you were not honest last night. I've become yours. You have to take responsibility." Looking back, we did have many sweet moments together. The car quickly arrived at our destination. After Harry got out of the car, he went straight to the trunk and took out a diving suit, putting it on. Lee was shocked by his actions and didn't have time to say anything before Harry found his spot and leaped into the sea. I followed him and jumped into the water. The water was deep, and the deeper we went, the darker it became. Even though I am now just a soul, I still felt a bit scared. This time, he stayed underwater for a long time, and even when his oxygen was almost depleted, he was reluctant to leave. Lee started urging him, "Harry, the oxygen is running out. You should come up. If you continue like this, you'll end up dead." He remained silent and continued to dive deeper into the sea. Even I was losing patience. The water was so deep and cold, the deeper we went, the lower the pressure became. Even professionals couldn't retrieve me, let alone him. Just as I was about to float back to the shore, I heard Harry's trembling voice saying, "I found it." Chapter 18. Following the direction of his flashlight, I saw a sunken, abandoned vehicle at the bottom of the sea. The car body was entangled with seaweed, and the strong pressure had shattered the glass, turning the inside of the car into a playground for fish. And at that moment, I saw only my bare bones. Harry quickly swam over, standing there as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Then he quickly unfastened the seatbelt on the skull and carefully removed the seaweed entangled on it. When he saw the diamond ring on the skeleton's finger, Harry choked out, "Helen. How ironic. That ring was the one he used to propose to me, the one he gave me, and now it was seeing me in this state." At that moment, the warning sound indicating that the oxygen was about to run out started to ring. I started to panic, urging him desperately to leave quickly. But clearly, Harry couldn't leave because he didn't have enough oxygen to sustain him. He gently held the skeleton in his arms, whispering, "Helen, I'm sorry for keeping you waiting." Harry was rescued by Lee. When he was brought ashore, even though he was unconscious, he tightly held my skeletal remains in his arms. Harry remained unconscious for 2 days and 2 nights. The first thing he did after opening his eyes was to search for my skull. Fortunately, Lee informed him in time, "Harry, I have properly arranged Helen's remains. Don't worry. Without your instructions, no one can handle it without permission." Harry nodded, his face ashen. "Continue with what I instructed you to do." Lee left, and I floated in front of him, unable to resist babbling, "Oh, Harry, Harry, the murderer is Maggie. How could you not suspect her?" Harry, who was lying down, seemed to have thought of something and slowly got up from the bed, step by step, walking towards the corridor. There were very few people on the VIP ward floor, and as soon as he stepped out, he heard Maggie's voice on the phone. "If he finds out, neither of us will survive. Everyone involved with that woman back then has been taken care of." I knew Maggie's good days were coming to an end. Sure enough, the next moment, Harry's eyes turned bloodshot, and he approached Maggie as if he wanted to devour her. Seeing Harry in this state and recalling their phone conversation just now, Maggie seemed to be frightened as well. She timidly called out, "Harry, Chapter 19, as soon as..." The words fell, Harry immediately lunged at her, gripping her neck tightly against the wall. "Why did you harm Helen? Why did you deceive me, and deceive her too? Clearly, I meant nothing to you. Maggie, I trusted you so much. I'm going to kill you." His grip tightened more and more, and Maggie's face grew paler, struggling to breathe. I was stunned. What did Harry just say? He said they meant nothing to each other? I don't believe it. If they really meant nothing, why didn't he explain when I questioned him? Why did he continue to have an entanglement with Maggie while having me? I coldly watched the scene, and for a moment, I truly wished Harry would strangle her to death. Lee rushed over, pulling Harry's hand away while Maggie gasped for breath. Harry, you can't do this. Helen died so unjustly. If you directly strangle the real culprit, wouldn't that be letting her off too easily? Harry's body suddenly stiffened. Maggie managed to catch her breath, her body uncontrollably collapsing to the ground, then coughing violently. After she finished coughing, tears streaming down her face, she pleaded, Harry, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Harry, It was a moment of madness on my part. It's all because I loved you too much. I didn't want anyone to take you away from me. Harry clenched his teeth, squeezing out a sentence through his gritted teeth. Get lost. I don't want to see your disgusting face anymore. Maggie froze, staring blankly at the man she had loved for over a decade. I will have Lee gather all the evidence to charge you with Helen's murder. Spend the rest of your life in prison. Get out! Maggie was startled, stumbling away from the scene. I thought I would be angry too, but as I looked at Harry with bloodshot eyes, I suddenly felt relieved. I sat beside him, chattering away. All right, big man, why are you crying again? Look, I haven't shed a tear. It's a pity I died so young, you know. There were so many places I hadn't been to. Just as I was speaking, I heard Harry speak up. You should leave too. Take care of the things I entrusted to you. Make sure they are done properly. I don't care how you do it. No matter how much money or cost, I want you to hire the best lawyer and make sure Maggie rots in jail. Lee acknowledged and left. Harry forced a bitter laugh, his eyes bloodshot. He muttered to himself, Helen, I'm sorry. It was all my misunderstanding. You said Maggie wasn't a good person. I should have believed your words. Chapter 20. Actually, during the 2 days that Harry was hospitalized, I went home to visit my grandmother. The little old lady seems to be doing fine. A few elderly ladies from the community came over, all of them toothless, sitting in the house chatting and looking happy. However, the old ladies would suddenly fall silent when they inadvertently mentioned their granddaughters. But my grandmother doesn't remember anything. She talks freely, talking about how excellent and handsome her granddaughter and grandson-in-law are. I think it's actually good that my grandmother doesn't remember those things. When I returned to the hospital, Harry was packing his things. He placed his phone on the bedside table, took off his valuable items, and then took my phone and a letter from somewhere I didn't know. He avoided the hospital surveillance and went to the hospital's basement garage. I didn't know what he was going to do, but I had a vague feeling that something was not right. Seeing him sitting expressionlessly in the driver's seat, I immediately followed and sat in. I shouted at him, Harry, where are you going? Why don't you bring your phone or valuable items? He couldn't hear me speak, just stepped on the gas pedal and drove away. I felt a bit anxious, watching him stepping on the gas pedal recklessly as we headed towards the coastal highway. Even if the car was playing my favorite song, it couldn't alleviate my anxiety at the moment. Is this foolish man planning to sacrifice himself for love? Just when I thought Harry was going to drive the car into the sea, he stopped the car. I touched my chest, which was no longer beating, and let out a long breath. You idiot, you scared me. I thought you were going to jump into the sea. Harry closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then took out a lighter, igniting the envelope that had been sitting on the passenger seat. Helen, I'm sorry. Helen, are you by my side? If there really are souls in this world, I beg you, please accept my letter. The flame slowly rose, and in my hand, a letter appeared with the words to Helen written on it. Chapter 21. Helen, I'm sorry for speaking to you in this way, but Helen, I really don't know what else to do. I was so foolish. You've been gone for 4 years, yet I still thought you were alive. It's my stupidity. It's only now that I realized Maggie easily deceived me with just a few photos. I had no idea she would send you those kinds of photos and messages behind the scenes. Helen. I swear I have never touched her. It has always been you from beginning to end. And you were never a replacement for anyone, especially not for her. You are simply you. Remember when you asked me why I chose you and when I started to have feelings for you? Well, I'll tell you the answer now. It was that gathering. You risked your own safety to protect others. It was both foolish and adorable, and that's when my heart started to flutter. Do you know, Helen? I found your secret diary on your phone. It contained every little detail about us. Our first date, our first kiss, and even our first. Helen, Grandma was right. You are a kind-hearted and thoughtful girl, and I have let you down. I saw your last message on social media, Harry. If I really die, what about you? Will you die with me? Now I can tell you, I will. Helen, please wait for me. The secret diary was indeed the place where I kept my journal. Everything inside was set to be visible only to myself. In just a few hundred words, I spent a long time reading. When I finally snapped out of it, I heard the sound of Harry stepping on the gas pedal. The front of the Maybach faced the sea, and I knew exactly what he intended to do. Harry, are you crazy? I don't want you to die for love. Promise me that you'll live. Do you hear me? But he couldn't hear my shouts. At that moment, the car rushed towards the sea. Memories started to flood back, as if I was reliving the day of the ocean plunge. Countless waves engulfed me, stinging my nose, throat, and lungs with a burning pain. Death isn't scary, it's the process of dying that's terrifying. Chapter 22. I watched as the seawater gradually submerged the Maybach, and I jumped into the sea without hesitation. Even though I knew that jumping into the sea wouldn't change anything, I still plunged in. Watching Harry close his eyes, being engulfed by the water, I climbed into the car and looked at him with closed eyes. Isn't this the sharp and handsome man that I once deeply loved? But now he's going to die too. The sea is really deep, and I sink deeper and deeper with Harry. Just when I felt desolate, a voice came from behind. Helen, is that really you? I turned around and saw Harry floating outside the car window, looking back at the other Harry still inside the car. I understood that the one outside was his spirit. It's me. Harry looked at me, his face filled with joy. He asked, Helen, can you take me away? Take him away? Of course, I can't. I shook my head. No, you can't die, Harry. You have to hold on. They will come to rescue you soon. Harry, I'm already dead. I can't take care of Grandma. If you can live, please take care of Grandma for me, okay? She's the only one I care about in this world. As I said that, I paused for a moment. It seems like besides Grandma, I forgot about someone else. Someone who is very important to me, but who is she? I can't remember at all. Harry smiled bitterly and asked, what about me? You. Harry, you will still have people who love you and whom you love. Start your life anew. I seemed to hear a voice coming through, and then the Maybach was lifted up. When I returned to the hospital, Harry was packing his things. He placed his phone on the bedside table, took off his valuable items, and then took my phone and a letter from somewhere I didn't know. He avoided the hospital surveillance and went to the hospital's basement garage. I didn't know what he was going to do, but I had a vague feeling that something was not right. Seeing him sitting expressionlessly in the driver's seat, I immediately followed and sat in. I shouted at him, Harry, where are you going? Why don't you bring your phone or valuable items? He couldn't hear me speak, just stepped on the gas pedal and drove away. I felt a bit anxious, watching him stepping on the gas pedal recklessly as we headed towards the coastal highway. Even if the car was playing my favorite song, it couldn't alleviate my anxiety at the moment. Is this foolish man planning to sacrifice himself for love? Just when I thought Harry was going to drive the car into the sea, he stopped the car. I touched my chest, which was no longer beating, and let out a long breath. You idiot, you scared me. I thought you were going to jump into the sea. Harry closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then took out a lighter, igniting the envelope that had been sitting on the passenger seat. Helen, I'm sorry. Helen, are you by my side? If there really are souls in this world, I beg you, please accept my letter. The flame slowly rose, and in my hand, a letter appeared with the words to Helen written on it. Chapter 23. When Harry woke up again, I was still by his side. As soon as he opened his eyes, they became teary red. Unfortunately, with the oxygen tube still inserted, he couldn't speak for the time being. He could only move his eyes to look at Lee. Lee understood what he meant and leaned closer, taking out his phone and lifting his hand. Harry typed 2 words on it, Grandma. He still remembered that he wanted to help take care of my grandma. Lee glanced at those 2 words and immediately understood. Then he closed his eyes, tears of regret streaming down his face. What's the use of regret? I'm already dead. I crouched over his chest, looking at his agonized yet ridiculous face. Actually, I should be laughing at his choice of that woman, laughing at his agony, laughing at him deserving to feel so miserable. But I couldn't help but sniffle, feeling incredibly sad. I stayed by my grandma's side again. Harry didn't break his promise. He found the best caregiver for my grandma, and even Lee would keep her company and chat with her. My grandma lived happily every day, and I floated around in the air filled with joy. One day, while Lee was telling a story to my grandma, Harry arrived. Upon seeing Harry, my grandma suddenly asked, "Young man, are you Helen's friend? You're quite handsome, a perfect match for my Helen." Harry smiled, and his eyes turned red once again. He hugged my grandma and whispered softly, "Yes, Grandma. Helen went on a business trip to a faraway place. She asked me to keep you company during this time." It turns out my grandma's condition had worsened. While Lee stayed with her, Harry entered my room once again, seeing the photo that he had torn to pieces before. His body began to tremble uncontrollably. Luckily, Lee noticed in time and supported him. Harry waved his hand and said, "I'm fine." Then he pushed away Lee's supporting hand and took small steps into my room, desperately trying to piece together the photo that he had torn apart before. Chapter 24. Later, he found my diary that I had kept in the drawer. When he opened it, he saw his name written on every page, and Harry broke down once again. Because in the diary, I wrote things like, "Harry, we're meant to be together forever. Harry, you promised me to love me for a lifetime. Harry, how could you carry someone else while being with me? Harry, will you only be happy when I'm gone?" Those were the questions that troubled me before, but now I know the answers. Because of Harry's dedicated care, my grandma was living a happy life. I continued to stay by her side, watching over this lovely old lady. One day, out of the blue, the old lady grabbed Harry's hand and stared at him, saying, "Helen gave birth to a daughter for you." She even took out the ultrasound report that had been buried at the bottom of a box and gave it to him. Harry froze, trembling all over. With a hoarse voice, he asked, "We have a daughter? Grandma, where is she now?" But no matter how he asked, Grandma had no idea. And at that moment, a buzzing sound filled my head. I remembered the most important person that I had forgotten besides Grandma was our daughter. It was his birthday that day, and besides giving him a gift, I was also going to tell him the news of my pregnancy. But the next day, we faced a breakup. The child I didn't originally plan to keep, but thinking about it being a little life, I gritted my teeth and gave birth to her. Little did I know, she was just a few months old when this happened. After my death, Grandma fell seriously ill, and the elderly lady, burdened with a baby, couldn't take care of her properly. In the end, the community decided to send the child to an orphanage. I lost those memories and I have no idea which orphanage the child was sent to. Next, I witnessed Maggie being sent to prison, sentenced to lifelong imprisonment without parole. I know this is the result of Harry doing everything in his power. Maggie can't die and she can't be released. I also saw Harry having my body reinterred with the tombstone engraved with beloved wife, Helen. Chapter 25. Maggie, who had been imprisoned for 3 years, suddenly requested to see Harry, claiming that she had information he wanted to know. Although Harry had no desire to see her, he was afraid of missing any news about our daughter, so he agreed to meet her. Maggie looked at him through the glass with a silly smile and said, "Harry, I thought I would never see you again." "I still don't understand, what did she have that I didn't?" Harry's patience had run out, and he said disdainfully, "What about the news you mentioned? If it's just useless talk, then there's no need to say anything." Perhaps afraid that Harry would truly leave, Maggie suddenly spoke up, "I know you still have a child." Harry clenched his fists tightly. "Tell me, where is the child? What have you done to our child?" Maggie chuckled as if she had gone mad, muttering to herself, I had everything. I just wanted a man. Why did she have to interfere? Why did she have to get pregnant with your child? I could have spared her, but she had to bury your child, so she deserved to die. I really shouldn't have shown mercy back then, spared that old lady and the child. I knew this woman had completely lost her mind. She had become completely insane in her obsession to have Harry. While Harry wanted to continue questioning her, Maggie suddenly coughed up blood. Seeing her in this state, Harry furrowed his brow and asked, "Maggie, what did you swallow?" Maggie, in pain, still had a smile on her face and said, "Poison. I can't be released in this lifetime, but getting them to give me a little poison, how could that be impossible? Harry, I want you to live with regret and loneliness until your death. What I can't have, no one else can have." Maggie died, and the lead to her daughter was lost once again. In the following days, Harry continued to search for her daughter's whereabouts, but it seemed like a cruel joke from fate, as even until Grandma passed away peacefully at the age of 80, he still couldn't find her. The only information he received was that our daughter had been adopted by a wealthy family. Fortunately, Grandma lived a happy life in her final 20 years, and until her last moment, her face was filled with smiles. Epilogue: the day Harry left was the second year since Grandma passed away. The middle-aged man, not even 50 yet, had a head full of silver hair as his life neared its end. He looked into the distance, filled with anticipation, whispering words that no one could understand. He said, "Helen, will you come to take me? Helen, why is it that for a whole 20 years, you haven't even appeared in my dreams? Helen." He reached out, grasping at the empty space in front of him, but at that moment, he saw a girl who looked almost identical to Helen. Harry smiled. "Helen, is that you? I knew it, you've come to take me away." However, the girl walked up to him, gently shaking him, with concern on her face. "Grandpa? Grandpa, what happened to you? Hold on, I'll call an ambulance for you right now." In his last flicker of consciousness, Harry still couldn't understand if the person in front of him was truly Helen or their long-lost daughter. But one thing he was certain of, he had hurt her too deeply, and it was unlikely that she would ever come to see him again, even until his death.